All right, this introductory psychology video is going to be about motor skills or motor development. So we have previously talked a little bit about reflexes, and you might remember that reflexes are involuntary. You just do them. They don't require effort. Now, motor skills, they are voluntary. These are voluntary movements of the body, and you have gross motor skills and fine motor skills. Gross means big, fine means small and delicate. So like when a baby starts to crawl, that's a gross motor skill. They start taking their first steps and parents get really excited, gross motor skill. When they start to be able to put their fingers together, that's called the pincer grasp. I said it wrong. The pincer grasp, if you're curious. And they can give themselves finger foods. That's a fine motor skill. All right, it's because it's smaller, delicate. All right, when you have to do things like button buttons or write or text, you are using your fine motor skills. Now, these motor skills, they start to develop during infancy, and they have two basic patterns or trends that we can observe. And they have fancy long names that are actually simple concepts. All right, so the first is you have a cephalocaudal trend. The cephala part, that root has to do with the head. Caudal has to do with tail, head to tail trend. All right, so generally motor skills, they form in that general pattern. The baby, the infant, gets control of their head first. One of the first advances in motor development is when they can control their head. When you have a newborn baby, you got to support their head. They can't control their head. Their head can flop around, but then they gain control of their head, and then they start to gain control of their trunk, and so they can do things like working on sitting up, rolling over, and then they get control of the legs, and they can work on more complicated movements. All right, so that's your cephalocaudal trend. You also have a proximal distal trend, and this is where you go inward, outward. So you gain control of the center part of the body, and then the most extreme of the extremities you gain control of them last. So these are general trends, and if you look at one of the charts where they show like milestones, motor milestones, like your baby, may be able to sit up at this age. They may be able to stand without holding on to something at this age. You can look through those and you can see evidence for the cephalocaudal and proximal distal trend in terms of what skill typically gets mastered first. Now, a few things about motor milestones. I'm just going to mention a few. All right, so being able to walk, and walking, I mean actually taking steps, because sometimes those first steps or things you want to call first steps look like falling. All right, but actually being able to take a few steps independently, on average, that's around 12 months. But then I'll have some people, their friends or themselves or their parents or somebody they know will be worried about a baby who's not walking yet at 12 months. I have been to a few birthday parties, first birthday parties, where the parents are like, oh, I wish they were walking. Why aren't they walking? Well, the thing is, for any motor milestone where they tell you, oh, this is when most babies can do this, this is that normative approach I've talked about previously. You have norms. When can a typical infant do this? All right, norms have a range. All right, like walking, it is normal to do that between 10 months and 13 months in some books, 14 months in others. I'm guessing it's probably like 13 point something months, but it's a range. It's a range. In my own children, they walk just fine now as 13 and 11-year-olds. But when they were infants, I had one child who walked at 10 months and the other one who walked at 13 months. They're both average, all right? They are both average. They are both in that average range. Another thing I always do like to mention too when I talk about motor development, I like to mention crawling. Not all babies crawl. And there used to be a big debate about whether that was a big, like, should we be worried about the babies who don't crawl? Are they not getting the same experiences? Are they maybe not forming the same synapses, to use terminology from a previous video, as the babies who do crawl? And now we see that, just some babies skip crawling. They end up walking eventually, assuming they don't have like a disability that can explain the fact that they're not crawling. And so, you know, I see less concern expressed about this than I once did. Just like, hey, yeah, some babies don't crawl. You have to have the motivation, and some of them are really good getting around with other means, and they're like, well, why do I need to crawl? I get along just fine. All right, so that's the basic stuff for you to know about motor development for this introductory class. And I know I say it all the time, but if you want to know more, take further classes in human development.